We'll go with it.
You wanted me to move around a few times.
We'll do like a Where's Waldo and see if anyone figures it out. All right. So, okay. Gotcha. So this was a combination medical AD president representatives of the conference
for the Pac-12.
Yeah. Beach, for the Pac-12. Yeah. Okay. Pac-12 football, of course, canceled for the 2020 season. One day later, representatives from the conference, starting with Commissioner Larry Scott, met with the media to answer questions about the hows, the whys, and the ramifications. We got Tony Siracusa on the line from Last Word on College Football. We encourage you during this tumultuous time to join him and the rest of the staff over on Last Word on College Football for exhaustive coverage of college football, both the teams and the conferences that are still fighting to play and the ones that have decided to shut down. And again, that would be the Pac-12. Tony, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here. That's a good way of putting it. Exhaustive coverage. I think we're all exhausted. The last 3 to 4 days have been quite a month.
Both the coverage is exhausted and the people that are doing the covering of the news that's breaking almost by the minute. So the Pac-12, one day after making the announcement that the season's been canceled for all fall athletics and actually taking that through to the end of the calendar year in 2020, had representatives from the conference, starting again with Commissioner Larry Scott, an AD representative, president, and a medical staff member from the university. And so what did you learn? What seemed to make sense, and what still leaves more questions based on what was said?
Wow, there's a lot there. Yeah, I thought it was interesting, the contrast, because when the Big Ten canceled earlier in the day, Commissioner Kevin Warren did a video statement, put that out, and that was the end of that. The Pac-12 had their cancellation yesterday morning. By late yesterday afternoon, they were holding their own they were holding an actual press conference. Larry Scott, the commissioner, Dr. Doug Ackerman from Oregon State, Michael Schill, who is the president at the University of Oregon. He's the head of what Larry Scott likes to call the CEO group, which is basically the presidents and chancellors of the 12 universities, and Ray Anderson, the athletic director at Arizona State. So they had representation a little bit across the board when they announced the cancellation. Their initial announcement was similar to what the Big Ten did, which was, we're canceling all fall sports all the way through the end of the calendar year, as you just pointed out, with the hopes of playing football in the spring, which again, just seems, we published some stuff today, just seems like such a contradiction to say that we're doing this for the health and welfare of these student athletes. It's what's best. But next year in the spring, starting as early as camp in January, maybe games in February, we're going to look at maybe an 8, 10, 12 game football schedule, which would mean, as you pointed out the other day, a season and a half, maybe 2 full seasons within one calendar. Within one calendar year. And to talk about the health of the students and the athletes, yet do that seems crazy, knowing what we know about CTE and the toll it takes on the body. We're canceling now because there's a lot of unknowns. And that was one thing Larry Scott kept talking about. We just don't know enough. And so we're canceling. So then we could put it in the spring where we know a lot and it's all to the negative. We might play there. It was a real contradiction. When he was kind of backed into a corner by the media about, are you serious about playing in the spring? There was a list of reasons why they couldn't. And part of that was the physical toll on the athletes. I asked Dr. Ackerman about it, and he said, yeah, we don't know that we're going to know that much more about the virus in 4 months, or about the toll it takes on the heart, which seems to be the buzz that all of college football is talking about right now, these new revelations. Look, man, full disclosure, as someone who got a positive test in April, I was already being told about possible heart and lung issues But as my doctor told me, we won't know long-term until it's been long-term, which is a year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years down the road. So what you're going to gain in knowledge between now and then, Ackerman had to admit was, well, maybe we'll have some more statistical analysis, but yes, you're right. We won't have any more firm science on it. And Larry Scott then jumped in and said, this is part of the reason why we'd like to theorize that we're going to have spring football, but we didn't jump on it right away for a list of reasons. And those reasons still exist. So I think, you know what, it's become a thing that we're going to play spring football because it pacifies a crowd after you've just canceled the season on them. I know this sounds really cynical. I think there's also a part of doing it to hope that you're going to keep some of your athletes around, some of your football players around, that there is going to be this spring schedule that, yeah, the ACC, the SEC, the Sun Belt, the AAC, the Big 12, they're all still talking about playing in the fall. And each day, the likelihood becomes a little bit more so that they're going to play in the fall. And I think that there's a little bit of a concern that there's going to be a rush on the transfer portal. You know, go play, because the rosters have been extended during the COVID period. The roster numbers have been extended. So I think there's a little bit of hope that you keep people in place. I know that sounds really cynical, and I'm not suggesting that's Larry Scott's first goal. But I think by dangling a spring season out there, a potential spring season, you're hoping to pacify the crowd a little bit.
I think that's exactly logical. It's the longest off season in sports, period. So people, by the time we get to September, are starving for college football. They haven't seen a game since early January. And to cancel the season and to double that shock, that disappointment by saying, and of course, we're not playing in the spring, so we will see you in a year.
Yep. We'll see you at camp next July.
Yeah, that is just an eternity to folks that love college football. So right. I agree that pacifies and gives some hope. And then if we get to the spring and they kind of kick it around and act like they're mulling it over and figuring it out, and then they have to say, okay, sometime in February or March, we can't play until the actual season. Well, okay, well, here's another letdown, here's another disappointment, but we're 4 or 5 months away.
Yeah, and
we can see the finish line.
Yeah, and you're used to the bad news by then also. It's been dulled a little bit, if you will, or at least your reaction to the bad news has been dulled a little bit. Again, I think it's disingenuous. We're canceling now for the health of the players based on a bunch of things that we don't know. And that, and from Larry Scott's standpoint, that really is it. Things that we don't know. Okay, that's fine. But then you can't put them in the spring and the fall up against a significant health issue, which you do know, which is CTE issues and other long-term physical issues, by having them play too much in too short a period of time. It's disingenuous. And I would be, look, we talked the other day about all of the financial reasons that are at stake here. And no one is going to say that's why we canceled, right? Larry Scott's not going to say we canceled because the CTE, the protocol tests are expensive, hundreds of thousands a year. And then you per season, and then you add on all of the insurance we've got to carry from the NCAA mandates, and it's just too expensive. But man, I'd have a lot more respect for them if they would just own up to that and say, you know what? These are costs we cannot endure and we cannot manage, since we're already in a financial crunch because of COVID, because of, budget cuts, because of all of these things, and we just can't do it. At least I'd say, okay, you know what? I get it. The testing of the players is going to be astronomical. The care of the players is going to be astronomical, because we have to acknowledge that as students go back on campus, whether it's 20% of the students or whatever that amount is per school, there are going to be outbreaks. It is inevitable. You can't have that many people in one place over a 1, 2, 3, 4 month period of time and not have some. It's about containment. It's about control. It's about isolating the people who are sick. That is all very expensive. And to do that on a weekly basis with the football program is very expensive. I get it. Just say so. Let's stop saying it's for the benefit of the players, because nothing you're doing connects those two dots.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day. We typically like to do that with the guys actually on the field playing, but this is the state that we're in, and we got Tony Siracusa, one of the very best, on the line from Last Word on College Football. So I simply encourage you to head on over to lastwordoncollegefootball.com and check out Tony and the rest of the staff's work there. So a few other things come to mind in regards to the delay of bad news, and maybe even worse news would be, okay, everything you just cited in regards to our knowledge of the virus, the spring season not logistically being feasible, and some other things involved there, just speak to just a shot in the dark kind of strategy of, we don't know, and there's nothing reasonable to think that we can figure out between now and January or February, but it's just more time. So maybe something will happen just by haphazardly that will give us a better strategy, or at least a better perceived strategy that we can figure out between then and now.
You know, Herm Edwards told me, and how much am I quoting Herm Edwards these days, which is just ironic. Herm Edwards told me, and we've all heard this before, hope is not a strategy. And, you know, if that's what you're building on, that we hope it's better, that we think it could be better, but we don't know, I got to ask you then why you're doing what you're doing. Look, and I got to reiterate this a million times. None of our pieces and none of my pieces and none of my appearances have ever said they should play or they shouldn't play. My point is context. These decisions are lacking context. The coverage of these decisions in too many places are lacking context. This is very, very complex situation that no matter what you do, it's got far-reaching implications throughout the school, throughout college football, throughout the conference. And one of the concerns I have is that the lack of transparency. They wouldn't share any of the data that caused them to do the shutdown with the players. You know, the Pac-12 created that players group that was speaking out on behalf of the conference players. None of it was shared. None of it would be shared with the media. It's just, this is what we have learned in a vague summary line, and therefore we shut down. I'm bothered by the lack of transparency about the actual medical research, because I got to tell you, there is the team physician at the University of Washington, who's also the team physician for the Seahawks, who says, hey, I know all about virus and the spread and all of that. No one ever asked me. There are multiple Pac-12 team doctors who said we were never brought in the loop or even asked anything. It was this Dr. Ackerman from Oregon State, and I'm not disparaging him at all. I've talked with him a couple times, and certainly he knows more about this than I do. But I'm concerned about the lack of spread in the community in terms of who was asked for input. When you take that then to a nationwide stance, and the ACC and the SEC and the other conferences say, yes, we have the same information. We shared information. The conference commissioners on a weekly or even daily phone call at times shared the same information. Well, how is it that these conferences have this information and have decided we can manage this? We can manage the onboarding process of the student athletes. We can manage the containment, the control, the isolation if something happens. And these guys over here can't. Someone needs to explain what that disparity is. And because they don't want to talk about what research they are using, it's just these guys do this because it's the SEC. It means more. And this is the Pac-12, bunch of softies on the left coast. There's a gap in there that no one is filling in.
Because what I kept hearing from Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, was some type of an excuse of everyone in this model of the Power Five is making the best determination and decision they can. That I can buy to a certain extent, depending on what their priorities are. That's the big caveat there. But number two, this excuse given to, well, we're all in different parts of the country, therefore it is hit different parts of the country differently and to a different severity. There's no question about that. The numbers show us that, but the numbers have also showed us that it's hitting different parts of the country in disparaging numbers at different times. So it's not like it's constantly been worse in this area or that area, or, maybe in one or two areas in the country, in the middle of Wyoming or Montana where nobody's living. Yes, it's been a better situation by and large from the beginning, or a worse situation in New York City or in a highly populated, concentrated area. But those are the outliers. For most of the nation, it's gone up and down in waves. Right. So this whole excuse that it's attacked differently in different regions of the country, that's absolutely true. Sure. But that's not been consistent all the way through. And when your conference runs from Nebraska to New York City, or runs from the tip of Canada all the way to Mexico, I just can't buy that as an excuse of we're making different decisions. No, you've got the same medical data and should have the same expertise at your fingertips to come to the same conclusion, regardless of whether you're the ACC or the Pac-12.
That's exactly right. I completely agree. Look, if you're Kyle Whittingham, you went and met with your team today and said, or yesterday or whenever he met with them and said, yeah, I know high school football games are going on in Utah, but you guys are shut down because LA County and some other parts of our conference map aren't good enough, yet to play, and we don't know what's going on. That's a weird conversation to have, but I completely agree with you that, look, the numbers have been going up and down. And what do we know? We know that based on logic, they're going to continue to go up and down in different places based on different variables. If you look at a 2-week running map of California, it's now green on most maps because the cases have gone down. But this is California. It's huge. So it's not true of LA County, but the Bay Area is doing better. Oregon's doing better. Washington's doing better. How does that relate to what's going on in North Carolina or Georgia or Tennessee? They've been sharing the same data, but it was interesting, exactly to the point you just made, Mark, is Larry Scott admitted that, yes, we have been talking every week, all the conference commissioners, and sometimes multiple times a week. And there was this idea, and I think you and I brought it up the last time we talked, that, the Power Five was operating as an entity and talking, what will the Power Five do? And his exact words were, every one of us made decisions in our own silo. That was the word he used, silo, as to what we determined was best for us. So all the talking and all the sharing of the information and all working off the same information basically resulted in a huge disparity of decisions, with no one willing to share the information as to why they decided to stay. Although there's been a little bit of sharing from that. One of the lead doctors from Duke Medical said, we think we can control the way that the players are exposed and what happens, and deal with the contact tracing. But the Pac-12 and the Big Ten have been unwilling to share more about why they don't, what is so different that they decided they couldn't go through with it. And those were his words. We all, at the end of it, just acted within our own silo. You're spending all this time, and where were you in February or March coming to this? And of course, they're all going to say we've been thinking about it all along. But again, you connect the dots, and we had this mad dash of different decisions and changes of decisions and input from different people in the last 72 hours before, the change was made. So, or the decisions were announced. So that tells me your planning really was a lot of hope. And let's see how it goes next week. And let's see what the numbers say next week. And hope is not a strategy. It's never worked for anybody.
And again, Tony, to extend from a different angle what we just pointed out, we could make a long list of the differences between Los Angeles, California, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Sure.
But for a football team that's either on the practice field in grass underneath the blue skies, or in an indoor facility, or eating together in a cafeteria, or working out, or in film study, or online taking classes, or the actual classes, all the or getting on a bus to go to a game or a plane to go to a game. All those things are exactly the same, and the cleaning measures of the facilities and all of that there should be a determination of what is the best way to do this, because that doesn't change regardless of where you are in the country.
That's correct.
None of that.
That's correct. And it's interesting you point that out. We had the chance last night. Chip Kelly and Martin Jarmond, the new athletic director, have a press conference to talk about UCLA specifically. And I brought it up to Jarmond in one of the questions that within a couple of hours after the Big Ten announcing that they were going to shut down the fall season, Ohio State announced, we are keeping our players together, and they can still use all the training facilities, and they can still work out in groups, whatever is allowed, numbers wise in one gathering. And here was the thing that really stuck with me. They said, we are going to continue to test them and follow the protocols of testing and do the rapid testing and the contact tracing if someone is positive and the isolation and all of those things. Ohio State is going to continue to treat their players like the essential employees that they are when they're making money off of these kids with the TV revenue and the ticket sales. And they are continuing to do that. Jarmond, I think I caught him a little bit off guard. He said he hadn't heard that. He said, we are keeping our players together as a community because we think it's safer that way for the players. You put them out back in, the general population, and it's kind of a loose term for a bunch of college students, but you know what I mean. And their access to healthcare then is the student health center if they start to get symptoms, and that's that. So UCLA will continue. He said UCLA is going to continue to keep them together. And he said, now that you brought it up, I'm going to look into the idea of continuing the testing and things like that. UCLA has already $18 million in the hole as an athletic department. So who knows if that ever comes to fruition based on the expenses of it. But Ohio State is the only one who publicly announced that they're going to do that. So I would imagine that they're going to shame some other schools, into doing it. And, we'll see more of it. But props to them for doing it. Props to them for acknowledging, if we're going to talk about the welfare, the health and welfare of the players, then let's treat them with the health and the health care that we're committed to. Otherwise, stop saying it's the reason we're doing anything.
It all just points to fear of litigation to me, because the last reports I saw, I would think that your average college football fan would guess that the SEC makes the most money, and it typically does, and it's right there. But the Big Ten per team made the most money in the last reported college football season at about $55 million per team. The Pac-12 was at the bottom, but not significantly at the bottom. The Big 12, the ACC, and the Pac-12 were right around 28 to 32 million per program. So they're losing money by not playing football.
A lot of money.
The risk for the athlete out in the general population, as was stated there and what you just said, or in the population of their peers, versus playing football in a bubble of sorts, could be debated all day. I believe that they would be less at risk with their team in a bubble kind of controlled environment. That would be my logic, but I'm not saying that I've got the perfect logic on that. So that's debatable. So I got to think that it all comes back to the fear of litigation at some point that's really testing these conferences. And Tony, I got one last question for you, and this is going to be impossible to answer. So don't you love this one? All right. So in my conversations about the Big Ten, I had a call-in show as soon as the announcement was made, and then had some other podcasts that I produced on the Big Ten angle. It's obviously, all five conferences, and you alluded to there being a perception among rabid college football fans that the Pac-12 just doesn't care about football as much as other conferences. We could debate that all night. Sure. It's serious business, and it's the livelihood of all these people involved. So I'm not going to rate and judge just because one conference isn't quite as successful over the last couple seasons, but certainly was before that suddenly in the Pac-12 they don't care as much. I'm not going to make that kind of comment, but certainly talking about the Big Ten, here's a conference that has been able to make as much, if not more money than anyone, has been as successful on the field as anyone outside the SEC, which I think it's pretty clear has been the dominant conference for the most part of 15 or 20 years, but the Big Ten's been right there. I think it could be successfully argued in second place. So it means a lot in the Big Ten. Okay. And they're fighting population shift and have been for decades.
Right.
So they've been successful despite people moving south and people moving west.
Right.
So it has been, projected to a certain extent that if they're on the wrong side of history in how this plays out this particular season, that could have long-term ramifications on the football success of the conference. And they're in a much better competitive and financial situation by and large than the Pac-12.
Yeah.
What could this mean to the Pac-12 not playing football if it's played successfully elsewhere this season?
Look, I think the Pac-12 has already minimalized itself over the past few years. It's not as competitive. It's not a conversation. Every 3 or 4 years, we get, a Pac-12 team that's in the conversation for the playoffs, or championship run. We've talked ad nauseum about what a poor job Larry Scott has done of running the conference, but that includes financially. And the conference is in a bit of a quagmire as a whole. When I say the conference offices, not just the schools, but the conference offices and the conference administration. And look, today they started laying people off from the Pac-12 network, because what content are you going to have? You may get basketball back at some point in January, 5 months from now. But in the meantime, you're going to be running, the best of Arizona State versus Colorado football games, charging $30 a spot for advertising. You can't live off that. And they started some layoffs at the Pac-12 network today. And I hate it because while I'm not a fan of Larry Scott, and while I think the Pac-12 network has been poorly run, these are good people who work hard, who've done a good job. And I know several of them personally, and I absolutely hate to see it. And it's Larry Scott's fault. I think that if the other conferences do manage to play and they have the ratings bonanza because there are fewer games, and so the college football world is concentrated on those handful of games, every Thursday or Saturday, I think it just further buries the Pac-12 in terms of relevancy on a national landscape. The Big Ten, because it's the center of the country, as it were, forgetting Rutgers, way out there. There's still value to it, and there's still the Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin name tags, that go with everything that from a national basis still hold a lot of value. There isn't that in the Pac-12, and they haven't done a good job of promoting it over the last few years. And now you got the financial problems. And now if not everybody, but if those other conferences wind up playing and you don't, man, you put yourself behind an 8 ball that is going to be very difficult to come back from. Ironically enough, look, there was a report about maybe 3 months ago that prior to this pandemic, there were discussions among the presidents and chancellors about buying Larry Scott's contract out. His contract goes to 2023. Maybe there's a way to buy him out early. But now we have crushing financial news for pretty much every school in the conference. There's no buyout of anyone. Every coach is safe. Larry Scott's safe. Every position coach is safe. There's no money to buy out anybody right now. And so, strangely enough, he's probably been saved by the pandemic.
Tony Siracusa, last word on college football. Wish we had happier things to talk about. And typically we're prepping games and talking about top 25 polls and conference championships and all the things that we expect out of a football season in the fall that would just be 3 to 4 weeks away.
Yeah,
not true. This time around, depending on your part of the country. And if things hold out in the other 3 conferences, we shall see what the final decision is there. But it seems as though they are prepared to play. Tony, we appreciate the insight, the information, and the knowledge as always, sir.
Always glad to do it, Mark.
All right. Thank you.